What is up, Tube users? I am the Stereotypical Gamer, and welcome back to another installment of Overwatch 2 Heroes, an in-depth guide. Today we are taking a look at one of the hardest heroes to master in Overwatch, in my opinion, Genji. Let's jump right into things and talk about his passive ability. Genji's passive ability is Cyber Agility. This passive works similarly to Hanzo's and Kiriko's passive that allows them to wall climb. The only difference is this passive comes with the added bonus of allowing Genji to double jump as well. Genji can use both of these abilities separately or together to climb up especially high walls. Genji also has the ability to mantle ledges similar to Kiriko and Hanzo as well. This allows Genji to automatically climb onto platforms when he's on the edge of it. Now, let's move on to his primary fire. Genji's primary fire is Shuriken. This is a projectile-based attack that Genji fires in bursts of 3. Each shuriken deals 27 damage for a total of 81 damage if all 3 shurikens hit. While these projectiles move fairly slowly at a rate of 60 meters per second, they trade off that downside by being extremely accurate. Genji will always fire 3 projectiles each time he uses his primary fire, unless he uses his melee in the middle of firing his burst, which will cancel the rest of it. Although Genji's primary fire is great for precision accuracy, especially at long ranges, it lacks any burst damage at close range. That's where his secondary fire comes in. Genji's secondary fire for his shurikens fires 3 blades and a horizontal cone in front of Genji. The secondary fire is great against enemies at close range because Genji fires all 3 shurikens simultaneously. He also fires them slightly faster than his primary fire. While the secondary fire is not ideal for long ranges because of the spread of projectiles, it works well at close ranges because all 3 projectiles can hit targets a lot easier. One interesting thing to note about this secondary fire is Genji will always fire 3 shurikens, even if he has fewer than 3 left in his ammunition. Now, let's dash along and talk about Genji's first ability. Genji's first ability is Swift Strike. This ability allows Genji to dash forward 15 meters and deal 50 damage to any enemies in his path. This ability has an 8-second cooldown. However, if Genji gets an elimination while this ability is on cooldown, the cooldown will reset and Genji can use it again immediately. Now, for the longest time, I thought you had to get a kill with this ability to reset its cooldown, but an elimination with any ability will reset the cooldown for Genji. While this ability does do damage to enemies, it does not do damage to enemy traps, such as Junkrat's Steel Trap or Widowmaker's Venom Mine. Now, let's move on and talk about arguably one of the most powerful abilities in the game. Genji's second ability is Deflect. This ability allows Genji to deflect all incoming projectiles and redirect them to wherever Genji is aiming for 2 seconds. This ability will only deflect projectiles in front of or to the side of Genji. He will still take damage if attacked from behind. This ability will block majority of projectiles in the game. The only real exceptions are beam weapons and larger projectiles like traps and turrets. This ability is extremely powerful, especially when you take into consideration the amount of ultimate abilities Genji can deflect right back at the enemy. I've made a tier list here showing all the ultimates Genji is able to deflect. This ability can be manually cancelled by pressing the ability button again. A few interesting things to note about this ability is it will apply the DPS passive to enemies even if the deflected projectile didn't originally come from a DPS hero. Genji will also block melee attacks while this ability is active. Blocked melee attacks, however, are not reflected back at the enemy. Now, let's move on and talk about Genji's ultimate ability. Genji's ultimate ability is Dragon Blade. This ultimate allows Genji to unsheath his katana and deal deadly melee damage to enemies. Although it is technically a melee attack, it does have a longer range than it seems at 5 meters. Each swing of his katana deals 110 damage. An important thing to note about this ability is there is a 1-second cast time before using this ability and an additional second cast time after the ability ends. Activating this ability will also instantly reset Genji's Swift Strike ability. Swing times for his attack during this ultimate is somewhat slow at 1.5 strikes a second, which allows Genji to only get 7 swings in during his ultimate. Genji can reset his swing timer by using his Swift Strike ability. Combining these allows Genji to get a few more strikes in with his Dragon Blade. One other thing to note is that Genji can use his deflect while using this ultimate ability. Now that we've gone over all of his abilities, let's move on and talk about heroes that counter and are countered by Genji. Genji is one of the most agile heroes in the game with great horizontal and vertical mobility. Both of these things combined with the rest of his kit make for an excellent dive hero. A tank hero Genji plays well against is Reinhardt. While Genji doesn't have great burst potential against a target with a lot of health like Reinhardt, he can outmaneuver him fairly easily and whittle him down without having to worry about him much at all. A DPS hero Genji plays well against is Bastion. Bastion is such a large and slow-moving target, which is easy for Genji to hit at long range or burst down at close range. Plus, the scariest thing about Bastion's kit is his turret form, which is completely nullified by Genji's deflect. Finally, a support hero Genji plays well against is Lifeweaver. Lifeweaver typically plays in the backline and can usually outmaneuver enemies with his dash and pedal platform. Unfortunately for Lifeweaver, Genji's mobility makes it easy for him to get to a Lifeweaver and burst him down wherever he is. Now, let's look at the flip side of things and see which heroes can counter Genji. While Genji is an excellent dive hero because of his mobility and great defensive ability that allows him to escape, he's very vulnerable against beam weapons. Tank hero plays well against him is Winston. Winston can easily dive onto any position that Genji is at and burst him down with no repercussions because Winston's primary fire is considered a beam weapon. This combined with his shield and large health pool makes him a difficult hero for Genji to try and deal with. A DPS hero who plays well against Genji is Echo. Genji is entirely a projectile-based hero, which makes him not the best to deal with flying heroes in general. This combined with Echo's focusing beam that can cut through a Genji's deflect makes this a difficult matchup for Genji. Finally, a support hero that plays well against Genji is Moira. Moira is another hero whose main damaging abilities are beam weapons. This combined with her self-sustain from her orbs and fade make her a tough hero for Genji to try and eliminate on his own. Now that we've talked about all the counters for Genji, let's dive into some tips and tricks for the Cyborg. I would definitely say I am not the best Genji, and I still think he's such a hard character to just kind of be able to be efficient on, but I've found the best way to be efficient and to deal the most amount of damage is to use your right clicks at close range to enemies, because you can get a lot of damage in really quickly with those right clicks. Your primary fire is more for long range poke damage, and it's never really there to secure kills. You may get lucky on a low health target or just getting some nice lucky headshots, but really you want to be at close range using your secondary fire to try and secure kills. Now, being at those close ranges does put Genji in the line of fire for a lot of high burst damage as well. So typically when I'm in close range engagements, I want to try and keep an ability as a defensive, whether that's my Swift Strike to dash out quickly or my deflect to safely back away from an engagement. I want to have one of those abilities on hand. And you can kind of play around with it. Like if I know I can secure a kill, maybe I'll Swift Strike in, secure the kill, then Swift Strike out. It just kind of all depends on the situation. But really when you're in those close range encounters, you definitely want to try and be saving an ability to use as a defensive. Another tip I have is to try not to use deflect for its entire duration, unless you're taking sustained fire for that entire time, which should hardly ever be the case. You really want to not use it for its full duration to catch the enemy off guard. It's kind of like Mei's Ice Block in a way. Yes, Mei's Ice Block is good because it makes her invulnerable, it heals her up, but enemies know the amount of time she'll be in an Ice Block and can prepare for her to come out of the ice block. It kind of works the same with Genji. the enemies will stop firing. They know when the deflect will stop, and that's when they'll start firing. So you want to kind of be unpredictable with the stop time of deflect if you can. Another tip I have is if you are going to ult, you want to use your Swift Strike before it because it will reset the cooldown, but you also want to be kind of unpredictable with that Swift Strike because you have that 1 second cast time when you press your ultimate button before it becomes active. You're vulnerable for that 1 second. So if you dash in and then pop your ultimate, it's kind of likely that you're going to get just destroyed. So you kind of want to dash unpredictably, maybe like dash around a corner, dash around line of sight, then use your ultimate or something like that. Dash up high to get enemies looking up to the sky. There's a bunch of different ways you could do it, but you definitely want to be a little bit more unpredictable with the dash that you're going to use before you use your ultimate. Another tip I have, and it's not really one that's super useful, but it's kind of a good one when you're first starting playing Genji, and it definitely helped me out when I first started, just understanding how his movement works, because there's a lot of different combinations you can do, and that's to go into the workshop mode and just look up some Genji parkour maps, because while it doesn't really work in a practical sense of like getting to these points, it gives you an understanding of how his movement works and the different combinations of what you can do with his movement. Another tip I have for playing Genji, and this is more of a personal preference, but I like to turn up my sensitivity when playing him. And there's really no other heroes that I do this for, but with Genji, one of the big combos that is really good for him is to dash into an enemy and then quickly right click, but majority of the time when you dash into an enemy, you dash through them, so you're now behind them, which is nice because then they have to turn around to shoot you, but you also have to turn around to shoot them. And so having a little bit faster sensitivity and just getting down 180 consistently, just being able to do a direct 180 consistently is a really useful tool when playing Genji. And since I have a large mouse space, I typically play on a lower sensitivity for all heroes, but because I have to do those 180s to get that swift burst damage, it's really hard to do that efficiently with such a low sensitivity. So that's the main reason. It does hurt like playing longer ranges, but for the most part I'm not really dealing any sort of critical damage at long ranges. It's mainly up close and personal, so sensitivity doesn't really matter all that much for that. Another thing I like to do is when I use my ultimate is use deflect like early on into the ultimate, because not a lot of people expect you to use deflect while using your ultimate, and typically when they hear you Eugene, which I like to call it when you pop your ultimate, a lot of people will try and just burst you down quickly so they don't have to worry about you swinging at them. So using your deflect early like that can kind of catch them off guard and get you some nice damage to start out your ultimate. But that's all the tips and tricks I have for you today. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure to leave a like if you did. Comment any other tips and tricks you have for Genji. I would be greatly appreciated because I am still very much a noob at this hero. Make sure to hit that subscribe button. I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.